and welcome to episode 3 of 2023 NaPoWriMo. I am your host, Bex Sherwood, talking through all things collab poetry this week on our weekly podcast special. NaPoWriMo, for the uninitiated, is National Poetry Writing Month, where poets round the world are challenged to write 30 poems in 30 days. We went, no thank you, that's a bit much, and instead chose to do 5 poems in 5 weeks, and we wanted to share our poems and our process with you all. So please join me in welcoming my other poets, the other folks I dragged into this terrible challenge: Mark Gallie, Katie Ailes, and Kevin Mclean.
Yo.
Hello.
What's up?
We're
So
here.
We are back again.
Together.
Last week we got together, we shared our page poems, and we set our new task. For this week we will be sharing collaborative poems. So me and Mark Gallie were tasked to write a poem together, as were Kevin Mclean and Katie Ailes.
I was supposed to do it with you? Is that what was supposed to happen?
Guess you both failed NaPoWriMo then.
It was a jest.
Okay. I know, I was kidding.
NaPoWriMo. Oh no, does that mean I don't have to do the next 2 weeks of challenges?
No, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. And there's 3 more challenges, I believe. So
what?
You think you're further ahead than you are.
No, there is.
Before we get on to next week's challenge, let's talk about this week. Now, obviously, I was involved in half of writing one of them, so I'm going to ask you guys, Kev and Katie, how did it go with your collab poems this week? How did you feel? Did you enjoy the process? Well, you're both still alive. That's a good sign.
Are we?
I think it's interesting. Like, I probably have the most experience out of the 4 of us of writing collabs. So like, I have probably the most comparison. And I think it's like, it goes to kind of what we spoke about last time, right? There's different ways to approach collaborative writing. And it kind of has to be a bit of a feeling out process and somewhat of a meet in the middle ground kind of process. Because it's hard to write every word together, right? That's not like a hugely feasible thing. But there is points that you need to write together, maybe some things you can take away separately. And like the first thing that was just a nightmare is Katie, her preferred method of doing anything is to write down every thought she has in no particular order on a sheet of paper.
That must be a really blank document.
Oh, sick burn.
Oh.
But
Sorry,
then when you're like,
I don't mean that.
When you're like, okay, I'm going to work on this little section, and it's just like random words and sentences and nothing like coherent, and it doesn't rhyme, which is a problem for me. And like, because
my poetry then,
you know, my process of writing is like, okay, I need to just put something on the page, and then that gives me a starting point. And those lines I put in might never make it into the final piece, but I need like okay, what's line 1? Let's just put in a line 1 and start there and like figure it out. And so like a rhyming structure appears, and like I start to get the flow for it. And you know, it might amend, but I need like a clean page. It would be like you're trying to paint a picture, but when you approach the canvas, instead of a nice white clean canvas, it's just little sketches and doodles of a million different things that you thought of, and instead of like painting about, you just got to paint over that. Like, it's brutal.
The thing is, I think we both knew going into this process that it was going to be, let's say, a creative challenge for both of us, because we, as Kev saying, we have completely opposite writing processes. Mine is I get an idea and I write down every stream of conscious thing that comes into my head in no particular order, just random phrases and concepts and ideas. I'll fill like 7 pages of a Google Doc just with random stuff. I'll call that noodling. And then I'll start a new thing that I call drafting. And then I start to maybe write again in no particular order. And then I'll start a 3rd document where I start putting it into the structure, right? I can't just write on command. If someone says, write a stanza, I'll go, no, I need to think. I start with a thing and I expand out, and then I chop down. Whereas Kev goes outside in. He needs to come up with a structure. And then once he has the structure, then he can start writing. And if you say, Kev, I need a stanza about this, he'll go, wokie dokie. And 2 minutes later, he'll have a stanza about that. I can't
He's
do
Yogi
that.
Bear.
It's called
Yeah.
writing.
So it was an exercise in collaboration.
Okay.
We're both still standing. We did
then
complete the challenge.
I think it's interesting. I think especially for collaborative writing, I think my way is better. Like, I know that sounds
I
like a
could
very
not
loaded
have done
statement.
it without you. If it had been two me's in the room, we wouldn't have had a poem. We would have had an emotional breakdown.
Yeah.
So you coming up with the structure, basically what we ended up doing is we talked it over. We came up with the structure, mostly guided by Kev. Kev wrote all of his bits while we were both in the room. And then I went away for 2 days, wrote my own bits, and then we came back together, kind of edited it out, rehearsed it, and then we had it. But yeah.
It worked quite nicely because we had a framework for what we wanted to do.
Yes,
and
yeah.
then my bits kind of gave Katie like limits.
I had starting and end points. I had the skeleton. Yeah.
So like, okay, it needs to be a kind of matching length or a matching, rhythm or whatever. And so it helped her kind of sort of mad lib her bits into the piece. So yeah, I think it
puzzles
works
again.
Yeah, right. I think it worked well, but it was I think we are the most different in terms of writing style.
Yeah.
So I think either of us would have had an easier time with either anyone else in the group, but I just think because our brains work in totally different ways, it was a challenge, but it was good. I'm really pleased with that. I think it's good.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to talk about it more, or should we have a look at it?
Oh,
I think the one thing that was just I'll say on it beforehand that I think is an interesting point is like when you sit down to write something, and it's the same for kind of all of NaPoWriMo. It's like when you sit down and go, right now about it can be very difficult. And I think especially with collab often leads to like a lot of cliche, like there are like tropes that exist within. And so we did try quite hard to like not do, oh, I'm a boy and she's a girl and that makes us different, and like or
how can I make
like
it any more obvious?
Yeah, or a Mr. and Mrs., the little relationships. And I think we managed to avoid that pitfall, I think.
Well, we'll be the judge of that.
The one final thing that we should say before we watch it.
A lot of defenses before we get to it.
This one isn't a defense. Well, it kind of is. There are elements of physicality. So when we perform this on a stage, which we do intend to do, there will be a lot more physical elements, which are kind of nodded to through the text of the poem. But as you'll see, we recorded this sitting on a couch next to each other. So all of that will not be present in this version. We're really excited to try this on a stage and actually do it together and see how it happens. But yeah. For now, us on a couch doing our collaborative poem.
I used to be a wrestler. People don't get what it takes.
They think it's pretend.
They don't see the effort.
Just the fight
dance
at the end.
It takes years of training.
Falling time and again.
To master movements this graceful.
Yeah, but they're not quite the same. At least people see the worth in the thing that you do. They know that it's hard, a skill mastered by few. You choose to wrestle? Say goodbye to art. They'll never accept you. No matter how hard you fall to the canvas, blood painted and scarred, just a stunt show attraction, without any worth. This ain't ballet.
Yeah, it's not quite as tough. You guys think you're macho? I'm calling your bluff because you wouldn't survive a whole day of ballet. We're not Barbie princesses like they all say. At least people see what you do as athletic, not dainty and twee, so cute. It's pathetic. They'll never accept us. Give me a break. You're on primetime TV with a sport that's all fake.
How can it be fake when every hit lands? I'd love to see you fall to the floor on demand or take chops from a giant, chest left red and oozing, frying pan palms leaving hand-printed bruising.
Yeah, well, you couldn't handle our grueling rehearsals, retooling each movement, each step, every pose, perfecting your posture in sheer skin-tight clothes. I had to wear spandex.
I had to wear spandex.
Our training's relentless. Hundreds of bumps, each one a car crash, smashing air from your lungs. The cost of your safety is paid with your spine. Save yourself in the moment. Pay the debt with the passing of time.
I was 5 when I started. Had my splits down by 6, and I'm sure in a decade I'll need brand new hips, but it'll be worth it. Because my body was magic. I could stand on my toes.
I'd fall flat on my back.
I fouetted on point.
I took bumps on thumbtacks.
Well, I had to get smaller.
I had to get big.
It's
a body business. That's just the way it is. I gave buckets of blood.
I cried gallons of tears.
Sacrificed everything.
Gave all those years, and I do it again.
Ding ding. The bell rings.
2-minute call. I shrug off my jumper, get ready to move, hairspray my ribbons, hear the orchestra tune, the buzz of the crowd.
Baying for blood. Drown them all out. See what I have to do. Talk over my match. Make sure he's ready
to leap from the wings. Deep breath and I'm off. The lights in my eyes blinding out. Any
thought of retreat gone. I enter the ring. Adrenaline pumping as the match now begins.
With an adage. A slow port de bras. Then my gallant Prince Charming offers his arm.
Wrench to headlock. Shoot me off to the ropes. Drop down then leapfrog.
Push off his hand for a swift pirouette. Then prepare for the lift. Strike a pose, then approach.
Steady my base.
Place my hands on his shoulders.
Grab hold of their waist.
Sink into the moment. And then I'm aloft. I know he won't drop me.
It's all based on trust.
Yours in your partner. The audience in us. And then it's all over. The sound of the crowd fades away, and backstage...
we are tiger balm and knee braces.
Makeup remover and sports tape.
We are sweat-soaked but grateful.
Because we made them feel.
We created a fantasy and made it look real.
So when your music is playing and the lights all shine bright, what's really the difference
between a dance
and a fight?
So good. Oh my god. I'm literally freaking out right now. So
Bravo.
Bravo. Oh wow. Oh my goodness. Oh wow. Oh my goodness. Oh wow. Oh my goodness. Sorry.
I'm happy with that reaction.
Yeah, that's not every poem gets that.
Wow, honestly, that's such a great example of like collab poem, and it made me so happy for for us doing this challenge that this poem came out of it from the two of you. It's such a beautiful way that you mirrored a lot of the situation and mirrored a lot of the, it starts that little like, oh blah blah blah, this is it, and then it kind of gets into like the realness of it, of like, well, it doesn't matter because the reasons we're doing these things are the same, and the consequences of doing these things are, slightly different but the same, and being able to like stop seeing art forms in such sort of binary, this is very different from that, and actually look at the comparisons of them side by side from like two people who are being sorry to use the word, authentic to their own histories as individuals. Wow, I'm so impressed.
It's funny because it came out of so many conversations over the years in which we both realized that our training and our background, even though like ballet and wrestling are very much positioned as kind of opposite ends of spectrums, they're incredibly similar. And there were so many other ideas that we didn't even really fit in around like, you're playing caricatures of characters and like, it's like panto in a big way, and about the storylines and all of that, but especially the rigor of the training and everything and the fantasy element of it. So it was a lot of fun because it was a way for us of saying, hang on, we know what we want to kind of talk about here. Let's make it poetic. Yeah.
And I think what I often talk about in terms of like, spoken word, right, and the point of performance poetry, and especially the way I write, is that idea of like, okay, what is the structure of your piece adding, right?
Yeah.
Why do it this way? Why say this thing? And so for me, it was going, okay, well, if we're going to do a collab, what I very much want is a reason for multiple voices, right? Because I could write a poem about how ballet and wrestling aren't that different, right? But that's not what this is. And so like, I want the structure to emphasize the theme of the point, right? And so what you want is, okay, the point of the poem is they're not so different, right?
Yeah.
So structure, you think of it like a piece of fiction, right? A 3-act structure. You start with they are different, and that's what we think. And then you reach a middle point where you go, okay, well, there are some similarities.
So
And then you
great
reach a
to
third
start
point.
that middle point with, I wear spandex.
Yeah.
So
It's
what
like
you
the
get
first
is-
line we came up with.
So what you get is 2 sections where we are 2 people speaking to each other, right? In the first section, up until ding ding. And then we are 2 people, and it's like they're not quite the same. We're saying different things, but
Yeah.
one leads into the other. So it's building the similarity. And by the third section, that end stanza, or that sort of, end section, we are saying one piece of text divided between us 2.
Mhm.
So we have gone from opposing forces to saying the same thing, and there's this
Yeah.
really nice thread through it. So like the multiple strand of voice and that back and forth adds to the weight and the theme of the piece, which is, I think is the way to like think about collaborating, like why multiples.
It's what I was going to say is it's a fantastic example of collab poem in that point, because not only is it a good example of a collab poem, but it demonstrates different ways to do collaborative poetry throughout its thing. You know, you can have the, you know, one side, other side, the overlapping voice, the overlapping into another thing. It shows so many good examples of the form within it. And then as the extra wonderful note is like, as soon as from the first line, I went, why isn't this a poem they've written yet? It's that there's that element of going, of course, what a fantastic way to do it. An excellent use of making that collaboration vital, but not only like vital, but like amplified. So like, yeah, like an absolute bang on example of collaborative poetry. Good job.
Yeah, I can totally see that not working without the other person there. Which is kind of like, you know, counterproductive if you're looking for something to go in your set. But like, I mean, fortunately, we all gig together quite a lot. So yeah,
as well with the physical element of it. So we're gonna do the lift. We haven't tried it yet because we live in a very small flat. But
you said it's canon now, though.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting for us because we were just thinking of move similarities and how, I mean, everything that we say, it's all based on trust. You kind of have to ground yourself in order to go up. And like, although there are obviously differences between most wrestling moves and most ballet moves, the mechanics of lifting someone are pretty universal. So yeah, I'm really excited to see how that works and have that kind of be the physical emphasis of these voices coming together and
everything is separate until that point. That crossover bit, and then we're talking about a move we're doing together, and you see that physically, and then everything after that point, the voices are much more in sync, which is.
And it was interesting. Just last thing, because as we were writing that, Kev had decided, he was like, "Could you just write that last section so that one person is writing it and it's in one person's voice, so it doesn't feel disjointed?"
Work off to Katie, smart.
It was literally because we didn't want it to be rhythmic.
No, but I didn't want it to rhyme. I wanted
didn't want it to rhyme,
that.
and so we gave it to me.
And I'm physically incapable of not ryming.
Then I couldn't figure out the last lines, and so I gave it back to Kev, so we'd end on a rhyming couplet.
But I do think that like I definitely wanted it to be one voice. I didn't want that bit to be us talking back and forth. Okay, now what, you know, even if it's trying to think of things we would both do, I was like, no, it needs to be like to emphasize that. So there's ways to use the writing to emphasize certain bits, right? Like we could have done that poem where Katie's sections never rhymed and mine did, and you know, to emphasize it further, and then we could have brought that structure closer together, whatever, but that felt a bit.
It would have been harder to get into a flow of it, so we ended up doing that.
I'm glad you guys liked it though.
No, I don't think we're going to be the only ones. Let us know if you liked it in the comments, because excellent job, guys. Very, very well done.
Yeah, that might be one for an SSC show rather than the Kilderkin. I don't know how high.
Just break a chandelier with my head. Sounds lads.
Just the sliding Katie along a bar. Just
What's really the difference between a dance and a fight? This.
On that's one of my favorite bits. Is it's the bit where it switches.
Yeah.
Where I say a dance and Kate says a fight at the end. There's like a nice little bow on it, right? It's the full from over here to here to crossing over.
It kind of reminds me of I think it was your Sestina from last year, which you did about
ballet.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's called the dance.
The
But also
dance, yeah.
Kev's,
Yeah.
because I did a Sestina about ballet and Kev did a Sestina about wrestling. I'd
Called the
completely
Dance, yeah.
forgotten about Called the Dance, which you can find
Ooh.
in our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
We'll link it below. We'll
Scripted.
link both. Well done, guys.
So how did you guys get?
How did you get?
Yeah, well, I don't know. What do you think, Mark? Should we talk about it before, or do you want to just?
Well, I mean, I think before we get to the thing, because I think there
Okay.
was like the talk of like the writing process.
Yeah, how
you
did you
guys
find
had
it?
Oh,
a
yeah.
thing. Like, obviously Collab has extra challenges because it's not just yourself the thing. I feel like we didn't really run into like writing.
It was more
writing
like
style differences so much.
It was more like scheduling conflict.
Yeah.
Of like, we don't have the benefit of living at the same address anymore. So that was obviously a challenge, but it got easier as the deadline approached and we had to have it finished. But also it was the longest part for us is obviously we got together to talk about it. We were like, okay, let's have a chat and see what we want to do and where we want to go. And I think we just both had a lot of different ideas, and we were like, okay, cool, this idea is cool, and this idea is cool, and this idea is cool. And it's like, okay, but what does that mean? What does it?
Yeah, it was like kind of unhelpful. We had a lot of what we could do.
Yeah, and they were all cool. We should have really done all of them, but like,
there's still time.
Yeah.
There is still time.
There isn't. We're recording the podcast.
Well, we are,
shit.
but then, without going too much into it, the sort of what we settled on then made certain aspects of it easier to manage or to sort of like trade off and work together of it, and then till the end when we sort of like again came together.
So were you guys writing separately in terms of like, okay, I'll write my sections, or were you?
So we came up with an idea, and then we were like, great, that's really cool. And then the next time we met up, we were about to start on that idea, and I went, I've had a completely different idea, and we went with that instead because it was just better. But we discussed like how we like to write and what because I didn't want to stress Mark out, Mark doesn't want to stress me out, and like how we like to write together and what we wanted to continue, and we kind of wanted to give each other a lot of flexibility and a lot of like room to play in our own sort of styles, effectively in our own like what we are known for. And yeah, it was a case of I tended to like, I started off the piece and I like did that, and it kind of gave what Mark was then, so Mark really had no control over what he was getting. Like I started it, and then Mark, I handed it to Mark, went, there you go, figure that out. And then when it came back to me, I was like, cool. And now I do another section again where I don't really have to listen to what Mark did, and he just has to collaborate with me.
So almost more in that sort of Renga style of like you are handing off a piece.
There was more of a trading off kind of thing. We knew sort of parts of stuff and sort of like acts or like directions that we wanted to go. So it wasn't a case of like I came back and was like, where has that come from?
Yeah.
It was all along sort of the funnel that we'd put that we were putting it through, but restrictive wise there wasn't.
But we did ended up when we met up to record it and stuff, we like got together and like read through it, and we changed some stuff, and we tried a few different things that we wanted to that we'd been discussing, but you can't try it until you're there with the other person and able to read it. So we did change it before we recorded it, which was great. That's the best place to change something, is before you record it to share it. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe I think I think
that's all we can really say without doing the thing.
Okay,
so,
cool. So do you want to?
Yeah. You start.
Okay, cool.
I'm starting the thing. You start. I'll see you in a sec.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. Take a step and a skip and a leap. You look down and you see that your feet are some feet off the ground. You glide using will and the sound of the birds to float on. And below you see buds yellow bloom, pollen caught by the wind, so sweet lights of space, glows bright from the sun, blushes soft on the side of your face.
What if you started falling? What if all that sprawling ground found you wanting, there's no one around? Would you even make a sound? Not that it would matter. From this height your bones wouldn't just shatter but splatter, leave you and the pretty petals flatter than your 2D personality. Morality and mortality mean nothing to gravity. when you do fall, there's no point thinking about after.
Your fall slows, and you feel all around gentle flows of the waves. There is peace, water lulled, meeting shore with a gentle embrace. Rock back and forth, match the pace of the beats of your heart, and drift off, floating on the blue shining seas.
How does it feel? What emotion does the motion of an endless ocean wash over you? You're floating, at least. You should be happy about that. But I'm sure the fact that over 80% of your surroundings are unobserved, unexplored, and unmapped doesn't distract from something just made contact with your lower back. You move to react, but your limbs move so very slowly, almost as if you were submerged in water, being dragged deeper and deeper into dark.
Eyes fly wide as you jolt with a start. Breath eases the rapid spun beats of your heart.
Eyes fly wide, but are you sure you've escaped your mind? Why would you want to? Breath eases when you're no longer confined.
It's dark, but it's warm. Wake here in wee hours of the morn.
It's dark, but you need to wake up. Wee hours wasted working, and for what?
All a dream, just a dream. Sigh, relief. Don't let sleepy thoughts cause you unwavering grief.
All a dream, but it isn't yours. Tax-dodging cores, devastating wars, and never-ending chores. Don't let it tempt you when this offers so much more.
All is well, all is peace, all is calm. These dreams cannot cause you harm.
All is well when you live at the top of the tower. But for you, these dreams are the only place you can play with power.
Nope. Nope.
No, thank you. No, thank you.
Goodbye.
That's awesome. That's really good. Terrifying. Terrifying. Really good.
That
This
was
is
kind of
the
fun.
answer to what happens if Mark finds your sleep meditation tapes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad you got that vibe. That was
Yeah.
100% meant to be what my thing was like the kind of weird yoga instructor of this hell cult was like the vibe I was going for.
But there's a real nice, like, sort of devil angel, like, on the shoulder vibe to it,
That's
right?
another
Of
thing
like
we discussed. Yeah.
the person hearing the poem is the person trapped, right? Is the person that is the subject of the piece, and it is either or. Like, I find it really interesting, and my brain goes to like sleep because I have sleep issues, and it's that thing of like where people I never have like a dream or a nightmare.
Yeah.
I have a horrible sandwich of both, like where there are moments of like levity and nice things, and then there is like terrible consequence to them or whatever. And that kind of like ricochet and whiplash really resonates with me. Like that works so well. Yeah, that's terrible. Are you using form?
Nope.
No, just because that
I had some
structure
kind
is
of
very...
like I didn't write it to a specific meter, but when I was writing it, I was kind of keeping like a kind of metronome beat or like a heartbeat in my head, like the dun 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 dun, and that was like my sort of thing to give it that kind of lulling vibes to it, which was only made creepier when they were like, oh no, she's the voice of capitalism, and it was just kind of like turned into this whole thing, which was not totally intended, but I fucking loved when it happened, to make it this sort of more of a social commentary. The original idea I had, I just said to Mark, I just thought it'd be really funny if I was like, oh, you're lying on a field of flowers and grass and you look round, and then Mark just interrupts and goes, and it's spiders, and there's spiders everywhere. And I was like, we didn't get
I went
spiders
way more
in
into
end,
the
but...
idea of I went more into nightmare than the humorous route for the
But I think that's the really nice thing about it is like and what is so good about like so much poetry, especially when it is more imagery based, right? It is more kind of conceptual. Like our thing is very narrative-y dialogue, right? It was like, here is a particular story that we are relaying to you, whereas that piece is so much more variable in terms of what the reader can apply. Like immediately you're like, is that a meditation tape gone wrong? Is it someone falling and having the thoughts like of no, I'm gonna be fine, no, I'm bloody not? Is it someone trapped between an angel and a devil? Is it like, there's so many, is it capitalism to socialism? Is it like whatever those things are, and you're trying to find that, like, you can apply so much over that. It's really, it's really nice. Although it's funny because when we were discussing, we're like, well, what do you think Bex and Mark are gonna do? Because we're like, we've got that sort of ballet dancing thing, the ballet wrestling thing. That makes sense. It's like, do you think they'll go off like an interest, like a something they shared? I was like, yeah, maybe like a weird role play poem.
We thought it'd be a D&D thing,
and it kind of is. It's a Call of Cthulhu nightmare poem. Very exciting.
Oh no, go ahead, Bex.
No, I was just gonna say it was great to work with Mark, because we both just kind of
fun.
I was like, what do I do? Well, kind of weird, not really a me narrator, like just very, I tend to use non-I related poetry. Like I have a few, but most of them tend to be more of a speculative, talking about a random individual who may or may not exist, who may be Cinderella, who may be whatever, and that tends to be like my narrative. So it kind of lent itself really well to, not to Mark's thing of really fucking horror poetry, where the you is threatened, and it's never a specific you, because then it means that some of you aren't threatened, and that's not good. So
Everyone
I
must
really
feel the
liked
fear.
leaning into like kind of creepy, and like when I was writing stuff, I was like, could this be made like, how do I write this so that it's nice, and it's this like thing that most people would be, oh, soothing waves, I'm on the beach, wow, everything's so great, and then spiders, and that was like my whole thing for the whole thing, is being like, how can this be directed enough to turn it really like startling immediately, but also be clear enough that it's like a dream. And that was like a lot of what I was looking at when I was doing my things, and trying desperately not to have a direct form. I wrote free form.
Free form. But yeah, those like having no like set sort of like structure to the thing, and going more with like what felt more authentic, it's like that to those voices, I guess, and then sort of going, okay, well that's like this, okay, well I'll do something slight, like the twist or the slight turning of it to just be like, which is why it's like, because originally we were kind of, it was that more like sort of like that back and forth of the thing he's taking over till right at the end, where it was like, where I think it was best, was like, what if they, what if the, again, it's the same start lines or the same sort of thing, so it's the same feelings sort of kind of coalescing together. Are they awake? Did you wake up? Yeah. Do you want to be? There's the
we chatted a lot about which order the last two verses effectively would go in, of whether to leave it on that kind of more like, do I come in and be like, everything's fine, or do we leave it with Mark being like, you only have control in your dreams? So yeah, it was good fun.
It was a lot of fun. I think we spoke about a lot of ways of like, if we'd had like, I don't know, if we'd had more time, we'd maybe have like expanded on other bits and added like bits and pieces. But like, I really like that piece. I think the process was very fun to be able to like, like springboarding up off of each other as well, as much, like
the escalating.
Like
I think it's really interesting for me knowing that Bex has done Renga, and like that this process was very much Renga-like, in that obviously like you had talked conceptually about it before, but it was very much someone writes something, someone builds on it, and then you build, and then you build. So it's not like, because I think that there are merits to both ways, but if you write a poem with the destination in mind and with the set structure in mind, you're kind of, you're only going to focus on that. Whereas for you guys, because you were building as you went, it left you open to respond to different possibilities later. So I'm really glad actually that our teams did different approaches, because it illustrates that variety of ways to do collab poetry. You can both agree on your end point, or you can say, let's just ping off each other and see where it goes.
What I do find interesting is how, like, because I think I've been thinking a lot about, like, and we were discussing, so Kate and I are prepping for a performance workshop with Aberdeen Performing Arts, and part of that was like looking at like how Kate will often lead a writing exercise, and like whether that leans more for page poetry or performance poetry. And like what we aired to do was change how we've kind of done them previously to doing a more structure based like writing exercise. Like my method sort of outside in, and I think it's interesting because again, I think that piece you guys have leans more to like a page poem, because I immediately want to like see it, to be able to like go over the lines again and dissect it a bit and see what feeds into what, you know what I mean? Like it sets a really good premise. There's a very good like clear like that stuff is very performance based, right? In terms of like the lilt to your voice and stuff, it obviously accentuates that, but it's one that could be beneficial to be able to read along because it's quite imagery based, it's quite dense in terms of the language, right? Whereas I think it leads me to think, I wonder if it would be more performative if you added a third voice, someone who was the linear character, the fallen character, and it was the more ostensibly that devil and angel thing, because then they can give the coherent narrative to the audience that then like supports the more imagery based like stanzas. It's just it's interesting to see where those kind of like why some things feel more performative than others, because even something like that is so heavily relied on like intonation and pace and the performance, like right down to the presentation and video, right, of like the light change and stuff, and I can picture it on a stage with very like with music backing and all that, but the particular writing style I think is potentially harder to follow. It's interesting.
I don't think sorry Mark, I don't think we're like totally finished with this. I think both of us want to like fuck with this a little more to get it to be something. I mean, I always write stuff with the hope that eventually it will end up in a poetry pantomime, and this felt, actually thinking about it, feels very appropriate for that. But we did look at the Angel Devil, and that wasn't, and then we went, I was like, hey, do you want to be nightmares and I'll be dreams? And Mark was like, absolutely.
Yes.
So it was just every so often getting a message from Mark being like, new verse up, and I was like, oh good, let's see what this is going to be. But yeah, I it was a joy. I was so pleased. It was like one of the first like collab-y poems I've kind of, well, not really, but like I haven't done a huge amount, and it was definitely different from a lot of the other ones I've written, so I was very pleased.
Yeah, a lot of fun. But yeah, I agree. I think there's some tweaks and amendments to be made for that. And
it doesn't need to be finished totally at the end. It just needs to be presentable. And that is what we are all about here.
NaPoWriMo.
Right. Speaking of presentation, that kind of leads us on to our next challenge, which very... Wait, what a segue. It's almost like I've done this before. Next week's challenge. Now we are saying goodbye to collab poetry. We have split the ties, not forever, just for our writing for next week.
Maybe forever.
Oh shit.
It really doesn't want to do that lift.
No, so we are saying goodbye, farewell to our collab partners for now, but we're moving on to our next prompt, which is something that's kind of familiar to all of us, which adds a little pressure to it, to be honest, because this week we're looking at performance poetry. So this
poetry should be on the page, none of the stage stuff.
Where's your fortune? Where's your canto catcher? Yeah, so this week we're looking at performance poetry, and by next week we will all have a new piece for performance to perform for you all. So I'm looking forward to this one, but I am a little stressed about this one because we're all spoken word poets. This is kind of what we do. So Katie, do you want to give us a little bit more for those who aren't, who don't already regularly pretend to write performance poetry? Yeah. We don't really, it's just NaPoWriMo. It's the only time we produce new material. So can you give us a little understanding about performance poetry?
Yeah, and because I think that a lot of the time people think, okay, well, any poetry said aloud is performance poetry. And like, there's certainly an argument to be made for that. I think in the context of this, throughout NaPoWriMo, we're really doing a thing where we're thinking, okay, how can we use a form in a way that the poem needs to be in that form to make sense? So that's what we did with page. We said, you need the page for this poem to function. That's what we did with collab. You need this to be more than one person for this to function. And so I think with performance, that's how we should approach it as well. The idea that if this poem was just text on a page, it wouldn't work, or it wouldn't work as effectively as it does on the stage. And I think that there's a lot of different ways that you can go about that. So it might be that this poem relies on characteristics of your body. Like if I'm performing a poem, it wouldn't work if Kev were to perform that because it relies on my accent or me being a woman or something like that, right? So that's one way of thinking about it. There's elements of physicality, like maybe your poem needs you to move in a certain way and gesture provides some of the meaning. There's audience interaction. Maybe the audience has to do something or say something, and without that, the poem doesn't work as well. So I think that there's a ton of different approaches. I'm sure that we'll be posting examples throughout the week, and on our YouTube channel, there are so many fantastic examples of performance poetry. But yeah, I think just to echo what you said, Bex, I think it does add a particular challenge because, you know, we're poets who do spoken word regularly, but we also just published a book, and a lot of our poems that we usually perform can also work on the page. So how can we make one that can't?
And I don't even think it's necessarily that it can't be on the page,
But
I
just
think
not as
it needs to
well.
what we're looking for is something that lends itself to being spoken aloud, right? Really this week it was performance, but it's spoken word week. That's this week. I mean, every week for us is spoken word week, but particularly this week. So I think it's fine if it could be written down and it makes sense, whatever. But I think there's always a case of, if something can lose an element from translation to page to performance, then that's the other way as well. And I think that's really
The
what we're looking
example
at.
I always give, like from my understanding of it, is so I have a poem called Insomnia. And when I did like my first year of writing to have some pundit gigs, I did like a little self-published thing. And Katie worked really, really hard to format this poem Insomnia with loads of like, you know, interesting genre and italics and suggestion, even to the point of like words being scored out and stuff, because the poem itself is like a stream of thought. Like it is this kind of incoherent, because it's supposed to feel like someone who is sleep deprived, who is struggling to like keep their brain together. And the end of the piece, it doesn't end. There is no like last line of that poem. Instead, what happens is I collapse. I physically fall to the floor at the end of the piece. And so you can put on the page all the words that I say in it, but you're never going to quite get the crosstalk that I do and the little weird dropped moments. And you're not going to get, I do it at a frantic pace, and it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds. And there's moments where I like, you know, very physical actions to it. But the key point is it ends because I can no longer go anymore. And that's not something you can translate to a piece of paper. You could write a stage direction, the poet falls, or whatever, but it'll never land the same way. Instead, it just kind of trails off like someone giving up. And that's not what happens. And so that's always like an example of like that poem, as it's meant to be, has to be performed. Not read.
And we've looked at some of the others when we did our spoken word workshops earlier this year. Obviously, you guys are about to are currently in the middle of one at the time of release in Aberdeen. So you know, we really
hope it's going well, guys.
Yeah, good luck.
Cheers.
Yeah. But one of the poems that we really looked at there, and it's, you know, not one of ours, but it's a great one, and I'm sure many people have seen it already, is Jasmine Gardosi and their roller coaster poem, which is one that would not mean anywhere near the same on a page or even on a stage as usual. You know, it needs to be performed on a roller coaster. Now, we only have a week for this challenge, so
and
no
like
one
that
gets
roller
tickets
coaster
Six
as
Flags,
well.
anyone?
Like,
That
that
one
wouldn't
roller
work on a
coaster.
different roller coaster.
It's
you know,
timed to the turns and the beats of that particular one.
So, you know, we're not saying you need to go and find a roller coaster this week, but there are some creative ways. Don't think of it so much as, okay, this needs to be performed on a stage. I mean, that could be, but performance art happens everywhere. So there's plenty of options to get creative, think flexibly. If you find other good examples and you want to share them, please do tag us at IAmLoud Pro across every social media channel that you can think of. If you're looking for more inspiration and want to chat through with some folks, then why not join our Patreon writing club? If you're watching this episode on the date of release, we will be having a writing club this coming Wednesday, the 12th of April, over on our Patreon for our community tier members. So that's £10 or more on Patreon. Gets you access to these great resources, to a bunch of cool people who are also writing poetry, loads of which are doing NaPoWriMo. Big shout out to everyone in our NaPoWriMo thread. Even if you've only done one, you're doing so good. If that's one more poem than you normally write this month, you are doing absolutely fantastic. Please keep the writing going. If you're watching this on the date of release, this coming Friday, we are back at the Scottish Storytelling Centre for our monthly showcase, our April showcase. We have a fantastic lineup as always, and then we'll be in Dundee on the 15th of April, where we're going to do our East Heat Regional Slam. So the slammers are all selected. They're nervously prepping their poems, I'm sure, and we will be there on that Saturday night to see which two will be going to Edinburgh International Book Festival for the Loud Poets Grand Slam final, taking place this August. So we'll be back next week with some performance poems. Does anyone have some final bits of advice, nuggets of wisdom, burning stresses that they wish to get off their chest?
Think of it as a spectrum. Performance to page. You don't need to be the hard end, like when we're talking Jasmine Gardosi on a roller coaster. That is the hard end of that really, spectrum.
Yeah.
Something very intricate. It's poetry page, whatever, the other end. Most things fall in the middle, right? Most things are going to be like people who are doing spoken word artists are going to be poems that can be on a page and exist there and not lose a huge amount by being so, but are enhanced by being performed by the person who knows the tempo and the intonation. Think of that when it comes to performance, like the speed of delivery, the inflection on specific words can often change it. So you don't need to go super to the far end to make it still a performance piece.
This might be one to, if you normally write in your head and don't sound it out until you've got a completed piece, this might be one to speak out loud as you're going along, thinking about how you say those words.
Yeah.
Like
on that note.
Oh, sorry, you go, Katie.
I was just going to say, on that note, if you normally sit at a desk writing, like try standing up to perform your poem so that you get your entire body involved, particularly if whatever performance mechanic you're using relies on physicality. Give yourself plenty of space.
Yeah, so we'll see how we're going to show these poems next week. I'm very excited.
That's my main worry.
If everyone's going to be frolicking about the place and ripping things off walls or whatever, it's going to be an exciting one.
Because that's one of the, again, just before I know we need to wrap, but I would think about what we were saying earlier, right? Of like, how does the format enhance what you're saying? I've seen a lot of people who are performance poets, and by that they mean, I don't use a microphone and I randomly walk into the crowd at points, and you're like, that's cool, but it doesn't add anything to their piece. It doesn't do anything. Like it's just a aesthetic style. So try and think actual impact on the piece rather than just running around a stage or shouting it louder.
A great example of this that we're going to leave you with today is a poem that is also on the page. We're looking at Harry Baker's A to Z of Time and Space, which is available in his newest book with Burning Eye. Links below if you're interested in Harry Baker's book and haven't already got it. But he performed with us during the Fringe last year, and this is one where I really think having a live audience makes a big difference. So we'll leave you with this, and we'll catch you next week with our brand new performance poems.
Bye.
Bye. This poem is called An A to Z of Time and Space. I wanted to use alliteration, but I wanted to try and do the whole alphabet. And as I started, I thought maybe I could map the history of the universe at the same time to keep it light. Bearing that in mind, could have chosen anything in the universe. The thing I went for the letter P is a pepperami. That is because was reading the ingredients during my thriving social life. And does anybody know, would anybody like to guess what the percentage of pork is in a pepperami? 40. The correct answer is 108%. For every 100 grams of pepperami, 108 grams of pork are going into it. It's lost weight during the process. As a mathematician, very frustrating. As a vegetarian, incredibly worrying. But as a poet, What a metaphor. They say give 110%, and Pepperami are leading the charge. So that's why P is in it. We're going to ask for your help. When I point to you, can you say the letter A? Then I'll point to you again. Next letter, spoiler alert, it's B. And we'll just see how far we get. First, there was nothing. I'm talking nothing but nothing. Then there was something. In amongst that nothing was something. And some things somehow split into some things, and some things even managed to become things. So take Adam. Adam was added up out of atoms. Before that, it was black and barren. Then it became big and banging. Out of the chaos came countless crazy complex patterns. And then, dun, 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 dinosaurs happened. Through evolution, everything's edited every day. That's how we fine-tune, finesse, and then finally find our way. Just as the galaxies have got into gear, the game changed because hip, hip, hooray, Homo sapiens came. We invent, imagine, inspire, and innovate. We've journeyed from jamming in caves to jamming jam in a cake. That knack for knowledge knitted and knotted away like silent K's. We learn the language of living, often a little late. We make music. We maneuver mathematical methods. We've noticed and noted the nodes of our own neural networks, overflowing, outpouring, open mics to operatics. We are the pork percentage purported in pepperami packets. Because we question, from quick quizzes to quantum quarks, revolutions of the heart to renaissances of art, you see. Scriptures and science seek signs of the sublime. Meanwhile, through trees trickles the entirety of time. Our universe is unfinished but utterly underway. Its vibrancy vibrates via ventricles, valves, and veins. We wonder and we wonder. We explore and we explain. We yearn for what is yonder. We zoom out into space. We can forget that we were not the first to be here. By any stretch, we will not be the last to leave. And whilst we can't control our history or know our distant future, we can make the most of what might lie between. We can be kind, and we can accept the kindness of others. The world shows us what we allow ourselves the time to discover. We can listen, truly listen to another person's needs. Not just wait until they've stopped talking to take our turn to speak. We can be brave enough to try and make all kinds of mistakes. We can be playful, because what is a life without play? We can remind ourselves each day it's not too late for new beginnings when a single moment can hold the whole universe within it. Because when we zoom out, we realize how small it becomes. It's either none of this matters or all of it does. From atoms, big bang, chaos, dinosaurs, evolution. The fine-tuning of the galaxies to humans. Imagine that journey of knowledge through language and music notes overflow with the poetry of quantum revolution. As the sublime trickles through the universe's veins, we wonder, explore, yearn, and zoom out once again. Because when we zoom out, we realize how small it becomes. It's either none of it matters